to 95% of the body's serotonin might actually be made in the gut.
Wow, 95%. That really changes how you think about it, doesn't it? Not just a brain chemical.
Yeah.
So how does this second brain talk to the main one?
Well, the main direct line, the big cable, is the vagus nerve.
Okay.
It's this massive nerve bundle running all the way from your brainstem down through your chest into your abdomen. It's the primary highway, carrying signals both ways.
So wait, signals go up too, from the gut to the brain.
Absolutely. It's a constant chatter back and forth. And it's not just nerve signals. There are chemical messages, too.
Hormones.
Hormones, yeah, like leptin and ghrelin. They manage hunger, sure, but they also affect memory, emotions, and then there are byproducts from metabolism, signals from the immune system. It's all connected, a really integrated system.
Okay, that makes sense. That's the infrastructure, the gut-brain axis. So where do the microbes fit in, all those trillions of bacteria and things?
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting and ties right into the sources you sent over. These trillions of microbes, your gut microbiome, they live right there.
Right next to the gut lining and those ENS neurons?
Exactly. Their sheer numbers, their location. It means they have a huge influence on this whole gut-brain communication system. That's why people now talk about the microbiome gut-brain axis. It includes them.
So how do these tiny organisms actually, like, talk to our brain or influence our mood? What are the mechanisms?
There are several key ways the sources point to. First, like we mentioned with the ENS, the microbes themselves can produce neurotransmitters.
They make them too, like serotonin, dopamine.
Serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, GABA. Yeah. So you've got the gut's own nervous system making them, and the microbes potentially chipping in right beside them.
Like a combined chemical factory down there.
Pretty much. And they don't just make them directly, they can influence how available these chemicals are elsewhere, like tryptophan.
The amino acid needed for serotonin.
Right. The sources mention how your gut bacteria can affect how much tryptophan is available for your body to use to make serotonin. So your microbial mix can impact serotonin levels that way too.
Huh. Ties back to that 95% again? It's complicated.
It is.
I know.
Another really big way they communicate is by producing things called postbiotics, especially short-chain fatty acids, SCFAs.
SCFAs, okay.
These are compounds made when our gut bacteria ferment dietary fiber, the stuff we can't digest ourselves.
And butyrate is a key one. I think I saw that mentioned.
Butyrate is definitely a star player, yeah. Along with propionate and acetate. And these SCFAs do some really important things, according to the research. They help keep the blood-brain barrier strong. That's the protective layer around your brain.
Okay.
They're strongly anti-inflammatory. They seem to protect neurons. And in animal studies, at least, things like butyrate show effects that look a lot like antidepressants.
So eating fiber, it's not just for, regularity. It's literally feeding bacteria that make compounds that protect your brain and might even affect your mood.
That seems to be a core part of the story, yes. And you mentioned inflammation. That's another huge piece. The microbiome has a massive impact on our immune system, especially right there at the gut lining.
Oh, that barrier.
Exactly. It needs to stay strong. If it gets too permeable, people sometimes call it leaky gut. Stuff can get through that shouldn't, triggering inflammation systemically.
And those inflammatory signals can reach the brain.
They can. And there's growing evidence linking brain inflammation to symptoms in a lot of psychiatric conditions. The sources mention older research finding patterns often more pro-inflammatory bacteria and fewer anti-inflammatory ones in people with certain conditions. So yeah, gut barrier health and inflammation starting in the gut seem really key for brain health.
Wow. It's incredibly complex. A second brain, a superhighway nerve, trillions of microbes making chemicals, influencing immunity. How on earth do scientists even start to study this? It can't be simple lab work.
No, you're absolutely right. The methods have had to evolve quite a bit. First, it helps to know how we even get this community. It starts right at birth.
Like how you're born, what you're fed.
Yeah, delivery mode, breastfeeding versus formula, any early antibiotics, those things shape the very first microbes. Though, interestingly, a lot of those early differences seem to even out pretty quickly. By around age 1, the microbiome usually looks pretty diverse and stable, more like an adult's.
And after that initial setup, what's the biggest influence?
Diet. In adulthood, what you eat is probably the single biggest factor day to day. Changes in diet can shift your microbiome composition and function really rapidly.
Genetics. Other things.
Genetics play a role, social factors too, but diet seems to be the most powerful immediate lever we have.
So how do they actually look inside someone's gut, metaphorically speaking, and figure out who's there and what they're doing?
Well, the big breakthrough was moving away from trying to grow bacteria in petri dishes that miss loads of them.
Because many just won't grow in the lab.
Exactly. So now the field relies heavily on metagenomics,
Hmm.
basically analyzing all the genetic material, the DNA, directly from a sample, usually stool.
Sequencing everything.
Pretty much. A common first step is looking at one specific gene, the 16S RNA gene. It's found in almost all bacteria, but has little variable regions that act like barcodes. Sequencing just that gene tells you who is in the mix, down to the genus or species level, usually.
Okay, that gives you the who. What about the what they do?
For that, you need shotgun metagenomics. It's more expensive, more complex, but instead of just the 16S gene, you sequence all the DNA fragments in the sample.
Bacterial, viral, fungal, everything.
Everything they can capture. And because you sequence all the genes, not just the barcode, you get clues about the functions the community is capable of, what enzymes they can make, what metabolic pathways they have. It tells you much more about the ecosystem's potential.
And this only became possible because sequencing tech got so much faster and cheaper.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Next generation sequencing was the game changer that made studying these incredibly complex communities feasible on a large scale.
Okay, so we have the tools to see who's there and what they might do. The next logical step for researchers is to mess with it, right? To change the microbiome and see what happens.
Exactly. Manipulation is key to figuring out cause and effect. A lot of the foundational work used animal models, things like germ-free animals.
Mice raised in bubbles, basically. No microbes at all.
Right, which lets you show that the microbiome itself matters for things like stress response or anxiety, because you can add microbes back and see what changes.
Or using antibiotics to wipe out or change the existing microbes.
Yes, that's another common experimental tool in animals.
Okay, so what about manipulating it in humans?
Hmm.
What are the approaches being studied or used now?
Well, the biggest one everyone knows is probiotics.
Right, the pills and yogurts, they're everywhere.
Definitely. The formal definition is live bacteria that, when you take enough of them, give you a specific health benefit.
But the sources seem cautious, right? It's not a magic bullet.
Very cautious. It's a huge market, but the key thing emphasized is specificity. The effects depend entirely on the exact strain or strains used. You can't just assume any probiotic will do the same thing.
So one lactobacillus strain might help with something, but another might do nothing, or something else entirely.
Precisely. That said, when researchers pull the results from many studies doing meta-analyses, they do see some overall benefit for depressive symptoms, especially with certain types of lactobacillus and bifidobacterium.
But maybe less clear for just boosting mood in healthy people or in older adults.
That seems to be the current picture, yes. And a big challenge is that studies use different doses, different strains, different designs. It makes comparing them difficult.
Okay, what about prebiotics? How are they different?
Prebiotics aren't live bacteria, they're food for the bacteria. Usually specific types of fiber that our beneficial gut microbes love to eat.
So they boost the good guys already living inside you.
That's the idea. They selectively encourage the growth and activity of beneficial species. Sometimes they're combined with probiotics, that's called a symbiotic. Interestingly, one review mentioned didn't find strong evidence for prebiotics alone improving mood, unlike some of the probiotic findings.
And there's this specific term, psychobiotic.
Yes, that term specifically refers to a pre, or symbiotic that's being studied or used for its potential mental health benefits.
Okay, now, fecal microbiota transplantation.
Yeah.
FMT. This one sounds intense.
It does, but it's actually a recognized medical procedure now, particularly for one specific infection, C. difficile.
Where it works incredibly well, right?
Life-savingly well, often. It involves taking fecal matter from a healthy donor and transferring it to the patient to basically reboot their microbiome. And the potential beyond C. diff is really intriguing. Some small studies in people with IBS showed mood improvements alongside gut improvement.
And the autism study. That sounded significant.
Extremely promising, yes. A small study in children with ASD found that FMT led to significant improvements in both their GI problems and their core autism behavioral symptoms. And remarkably, those benefits seem to last for up to 2 years.
Wow. 2 years.
Yeah, it's still early days, small study, needs much more research, but it's very compelling. And it fits with those animal studies where researchers could essentially transfer depressive or autistic-like traits just by transferring the microbes via FMT.
That really points to the microbiome playing a causal role, not just being associated.
It's strong evidence in that direction, yes.
Any other cutting-edge ways to tweak the microbiome being explored?
Phage therapy is one. Using viruses that specifically target bacteriophages?
Like tiny guided missiles for bacteria.
Kind of. The idea is you could use them to selectively remove harmful bacteria or maybe even promote beneficial ones. It's still mostly in the research phase for complex things like mental health, but it's a very active area.
Okay, so using all these methods, observing, sequencing, manipulating, what have researchers actually found when they compare the microbiomes of people with different psychiatric conditions to healthy controls?
Well, the consistent theme across the sources is that they do find differences in the composition, but
And it's not simple. No single depression bug or anxiety bug.
exactly, there's rarely one clear signature. Results can sometimes vary between studies, partly because everyone's microbiome is so incredibly unique and influenced by diet, lifestyle, medication, so many things. But there are definitely patterns emerging.
Okay, let's walk through some specifics from the sources. What about depression, MDD?
For MDD, studies pretty consistently report differences. For example, some research notes lower levels of genera like Cuprococcus and Dialister in people with depression. One very large study linked having more butyrate-producing bacteria like Faecalibacterium and Cuprococcus with better quality of life
And
scores.
the probiotic link we mentioned.
Right, the meta-analyses suggesting some Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium strains might help with depressive symptoms, keeping in mind all those caveats about specificity and study quality.
Okay. How about bipolar disorder, BPAD?
Some overlap with MDD findings, like sometimes seeing lower Faecalibacterium, but also conflicting results and sometimes associations with more pro-inflammatory types like Flavonofractor. The really interesting recent work, though, are those two clinical trials.
The probiotic ones.
Yes, using a Lactobacillus bifidobacterium combo as an add-on treatment. A smaller pilot study found cognitive benefits, and a larger, proper randomized trial actually found it reduced how often people needed to be rehospitalized for mania.
That's a pretty concrete outcome. Reduced rehospitalization.
It is. Needs more confirmation, of course, but potentially very significant.
Anxiety, the one that feels most intuitively linked to the gut. What's the scoop there?
Well, the animal studies are pretty strong. You can see effects on the stress hormone system, the HPA axis, and reduce anxiety-like behaviors in rodents with certain probiotics.
But in humans,
Less consistent, but cautiously hopeful, maybe? There was that one small study linking eating more fermented foods to lower social anxiety in students prone to neuroticism. But the sources really flagged a lack of research specifically on things like panic disorder or generalized anxiety disorder. It's a bit of a gap. Most focus has been on depression or stress more broadly.
right, only one PTSD study mentioned finding some differences.
Yeah, and PTSD is complex, distinct from other anxiety disorders, so more work needed there for sure.
What about schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders?
Again, compositional differences are seen. Things like increased Vibrio or certain lactobacillus-related bacteria, sometimes found in people having their first episode, and occasionally correlating with how severe symptoms are or how well they respond to treatment.
And there was that interesting hypothesis linking microbiome changes to brain markers in high-risk individuals.
Yeah, very intriguing, though speculative. Linking potential SCFA production changes to microglia activity and brain chemistry markers like choline. And again, those animal FMT studies are powerful. Transferring microbes from patients with schizophrenia could induce behavioral changes in mice.
Okay, switching gears slightly, neurodegenerative disorders, like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's.
Parkinson's has probably gotten the most attention here, partly because GI issues like constipation are super common and can actually start years before the motor symptoms we associate with PD.
So the gut problems come first.
Often, yes. And studies find microbiome differences trends like more lactobacillus and bifidobacterium in PD, maybe less bifidobacterium in Alzheimer's. What's really fascinating is that the microbiome in PD looks similar to the microbiome in a condition called REM sleep behavior disorder.
Which is a known risk factor for developing Parkinson's later.
Exactly, suggesting these microbiome changes might be happening really early in the disease process, maybe even contributing. There have also been a few small probiotic trials in PD and AD showing some hints of benefit for motor or cognitive function, but very preliminary.
And finally, autism spectrum disorder, ASD. You mentioned the GI link is strong there too.
Very strong. High rates of constipation, diarrhea, pain. And yes, studies find compositional differences, sometimes mentioning things like Clostridium or Sotorella. The animal FMT studies were huge here, showing you could transfer autistic-like behaviors with microbes.
And that human FMT trial?
Right, the one in kids showing sustained improvement in GI and behavioral symptoms for up to 2 years. It's generated a lot of excitement, but again, small study needs